Sometimes we face into a choice or decision where we entirely own the path that's got us there. And yet still, we can find ourselves unsure of whether to take the big step that makes the change happen. You know, this tipping point from preparation into activation. And that's what I'd love to explore today. Might be useful to add that I'm actually sitting in my kitchen today, so this feels like a very intimate conversation, and also there might be some different background sounds, but it's really lovely to be chatting with you, sitting by the warm Arga in my comfy chair, and I'm looking forward to this exploration. Welcome to the Henny Flynn podcast, the space for deepening self-awareness with profound self-compassion. I'm Henny. I write, coach, and speak about how exploring our inner world can transform how we experience our outer world, all founded on a bedrock of self-love. Settle in and listen and see where the episode takes you. So these kinds of decisions, they can feel really enormous to us. You know, the decisions that we own fully from the beginning. Obviously, there are so many times in our lives where we find ourselves having to make choices, find ourselves standing on the brink of change, where the change hasn't felt like it's entirely been driven by us, even though we might recognise that choices that we've made in the past have led us to that situation. It still might feel as though there are external factors, and I think that often feels that way with change. But really what I want to focus on today is those changes that we do fully own. And sometimes they can be the changes that arise out of what I call beautiful disruption, where maybe we've been bobbing along, things have been going pretty well or pretty smooth, and something for some reason leads us to disrupt. Now, sometimes that happens because of self-sabotage, and sometimes that happens because there's a fire in our belly that drives us into taking action of some kind. And it can be really, really useful to examine what is actually driving that energy. And maybe that's a topic for another episode. It's certainly something that comes up in the one-to-one exploration that I do with people through the coaching. But today, what I'd really love to talk about is that specific point where the fire has been lit. You've grabbed hold of this idea of a change that you want to make. And then you find yourself standing at the tipping point. You find yourself standing on the edge of taking the big step into what will actually make the change come into fruition. So, like I said in the intro, we move from preparation into activation. And these decisions can feel so enormous to us as individuals. They can feel gigantic inside us, even if in the outside world they can seem relatively insignificant. And, as I say that, I wonder if there's anything that comes up for you, any moment that you recognize in your own life, maybe something you're facing into right now. I'm recording this in January, and that's a classic time for us to be clearing away the old and, embracing the new or creating the new. I'm also really mindful that we are coming toward the end of the Chinese year of the wood snake. And that's all been about shedding, about releasing the stuff that no longer serves us. And that can feel very, very challenging. Um, so I think there's, and as we come toward the end of the wood snake, we're facing into the year of the fire horse. I don't know if this is something that has been showing up in your social media feeds in the same way it has for me. But um, that's all about this energy and forward momentum, and can also be a kind of scattered momentum unless we're prepared for it. And so the wood snake, the shedding, the clarity, the clearing the way can be, in these sort of contexts, can be really, really useful as we support ourselves in creating the best conditions for the changes that we want to see in the coming year. So I'm going to share, something which is a brilliant example, I think, of something that is looming very large for me, but in the grand scheme of things, it means very little. But something, for some reason, has driven me to completely change the way that I manage and design the look and feel of my website. Gosh, how banal that is, or banal even. And yet, obviously I run a business. It's really important. It's my public face, in sort of one context. And so, for me personally, it feels significant. In the outside world, it's very minimal. And I really want to make sure that I do it as well as I can. And I want to make sure that I'm making the right decision. So I'm at this tipping point. And the tipping point is, do I commit to all of the work that I've been putting in over the last few weeks to reshape this experience for the people who come and people who are curious about what I offer? My driver is that I really want to reduce the noise that there can be in the digital world, and I want to create a space that feels as calm an environment as I possibly can, while still doing the job of a website, still sharing information and offering what I do. So do I commit to that, or do I stay with what I have now? Do I stay with an approach that's been broadly the same? I mean, obviously there have been changes, but it's been broadly the same for several years. Now, for you, maybe you recognize that there were times of changing job, or or sort of moving roles within the same organization, or maybe even like moving house, moving location, or clearing out things that you no longer need in your home. That's kind of part of that releasing aspect of this. Or finally releasing old stories that you've been carrying about who you are in this world. So these tipping points, these points of, I often think of them as like the sliding door moments. Like, we know we can step through, or we can shut the door and we can step back. And that's always a choice. And that's important to remember. So these sliding door moments, they can be about practical things. So for me, the website, they can be about emotional things. So do we change a belief that we've been holding for a very long time? Or they can be energetic, in the sense of, do we choose to show up in the world in a way that feels more authentically us now? Or do we step back and continue as we were before? And I say that without judgment. It's really important that we approach, explore, face into this exploration um, without judgment, always with compassion and always with this sort of this spaciousness. So we're not so kind of tangled up in its depths that we can't see what options we have, but we're able to extricate ourselves sufficiently that we can see with compassion, we can see the complexity, we can feel the complexity, and we can hold space for it. So we're not just lost in it. So all of these different types of tipping points or sliding door moments, they require essentially the same kind of care and attention. And the other thing that I just want to say before kind of diving into the sort of main thoughts that I've been having around this is also about remembering that this stuff is never silly. Something that I often hear when I'm working with the groups that I work with, on the short courses, or when I'm working one-to-one with clients, or even just in conversation with friends or family. What we notice is that we can often find ourselves saying things like, "Oh, I know that's silly, but I know it's silly to be so worried about it," or "I know it's ridiculous that this feels such a big thing to me." But the truth is, the reality is that making changes or noticing something about how we're currently behaving or what we're currently believing is not something that we need to minimize. We don't have to have this precursor of oh, I know it's silly, or I know it's ridiculous, or I know it sounds silly, whatever it might be. We don't have to caveat the things that are taking our attention in that way, because the whole of us is always worthy of our loving attention, even the things that we might have come to believe are not. So if something's taking our energy, taking our attention, my sense is that there will be something in it that is asking to be seen or asking to be heard. It might be a relatively small thing that we can tackle, approach, manage in a fairly light way, or it might be something much bigger that has been obscured from our view for whatever reason, that's only now coming to the fore. So kind of noticing, and this really relates back to what I was saying about, we notice the fire in our belly that starts to kind of drive some energy. At that stage, it can be really interesting to pause and go like, oh, I wonder what's driving this. So paying attention to ourselves is always useful. And actually, it's part of what enables us to pay deeper attention to what's happening for other people. Not in a way that means that we then know or can fix or understand or control what other people do, but simply in a way that deepens our compassion for what might be sitting underneath someone else's words or actions. And that, gosh, that is something that the world really needs in bucket loads right now. So, I really feel that this work, that the beautiful souls that gather here, that connect with this work that we're all doing consciously or unconsciously in the world, the souls that are exploring it with a more mindful way, every time we learn how to love ourselves a little bit more fully, we're actually learning how to love others more fully too, and learning how to love the earth around us and all of the inhabitants of the earth, the creatures, the trees, the plants, more fully as well. Anyway, a slight segue. So just sort of back to this really the crux of what I wanted to talk about today, these sliding door moments, these tipping points. Like, how do we know that we're stepping into the right decision, even when it's something that is a change that we have created ourselves? So my reflections on this is, one of them is, fundamentally, we all evolve. And sometimes finding ourselves in these places is an expression of that evolution. And it can be as simple and as complicated as that. But just this awareness of like, oh, stuff has changed. Sometimes we don't need to do the big digging around. Sometimes we can simply say, oh, okay, like I'm in this place in my life right now. And so this change feels more available, more appropriate, more intuitive, more in flow with where I am right now. And that can be enough. And so just recognizing our own evolution can be something that can help us with that decision to step through the threshold, to step through the sliding doors. And sort of that really kind of ties into the next point, which is that something has led us here. Trusting ourselves, trusting our all those micro and macro decisions that we've made in our life that have got us to this point, trusting those, that can be an enormous aspect of trusting that we know our next step too. And this is really about mindful awareness. And I think that's why, for me, so much of this deep inner work is about this mindful self-awareness, and growing our self-knowledge is such a useful aspect of how we make and manage and navigate change in our lives. Psychology Today, which is an online magazine, can be really useful, actually. It's got really useful writers and articles in there if there are things that you're curious about from a psychological perspective, or what psychologists might say about an aspect of your life that you're facing into. So Psychology Today, it suggests that knowing that you're making the right choice involves a mix of critical thinking. So have I got all the data points? Aligning with your values. Does this really sit right with me, with the person that I wish to be and the person that I am inside? It also involves listening to your gut. And I think that is where this deep inner work can be so powerful, because it enables us to navigate the noise that can be inside us, the conflicting voices from the different parts of us, and really coming into that place of, well, what does my inner wisdom say? Where's my deep yes or my deep no? And then the fourth part is accepting imperfection. And this is so crucial, because rather than absolute certainty, if we can look for feelings of clarity or calm amidst the fear of the unknown, if we can, and we do that by researching our options thoroughly, or considering the impacts of the changes that we want to make on others who might be affected. So for me, the impact of me making changes on my website impacts you. If you've ever visited it or wish to visit it and find out more about me, it's you that I'm really thoughtful about. In work terms, it would be like, who are your stakeholders, And then always remembering that we can adapt or change course. And that's really important. I'll talk about that again in a little bit, actually. So focusing on, wise decision making with discernment, really, really feeling into all of these different factors rather than making perfect outcomes. Because what is perfection? That can be, that can be a really, again, another podcast episode, really. Sometimes we can have these ideals of what perfection looks like, but, life rarely works out in that sort of fixed mindset of what perfection would be. And in that becomes an even more beautiful place, because it's not about perfection. We can't control. What Tara Brach talks about is the illusion of control. So in day-to-day decision making, so for example, we might be faced with a piece of cake or a piece of apple. In those kinds of decision making choices, the brain follows these very complex processes where immediate desires clash with long-term consequences. And we see that, in our everyday life, like these kind of tiny little dopamine hits that we get, and how that can influence, the way that we use our phone, or the way that we eat, or the way that we move, way that we exercise. We see it all the time. But those same complex processes can also impact or influence our longer term or more significant changes, because the choice can be maintaining the known state of the status quo. So for me, my current website, or the unknown state of something new. And the brain, i.e. my new website, so the brain really loves the status quo. It's less effortful. We love to conserve our energy. It's a survival strategy, which absolutely makes sense in our ancient brain, our ancient lives, the lives that our oldest ancestors lived, because food and resources were scarce. But that isn't necessarily what always serves us in the modern day, certainly in the environments that, many of us listening here will be operating in. So kind of just recognizing as well, having a bit of compassion for our desire to maintain the status quo, or the fear of what the unknown might be. That can be really useful when we're facing into these decision points. And, as part of that, stress and threat affect our decision-making ability. So if there's a load of stuff going on in our lives around us, it can become very, very difficult to even make, to make a decision that in a calmer sort of world, we might be much more capable of working out whether it's the right thing or not. So what I'm thinking about is those times when we just go, I just can't think about that now. I just can't make a decision about that now. Or times where lots of decision-making points collide, maybe, the choice about taking a new job, and about moving house, and about which school your sort of child should go to, or these very like practical real world choices. If they all collide at the same time, it becomes almost impossible to manage them all simultaneously, because it's overload, it's decision overload. And so being really compassionate about that, and prioritizing which one really needs my attention, becomes our best strategy. in order to conserve and use our resources in the most useful way for us and for getting the best outcome. And in a day-to-day sense, we can't make decisions when we're tired. And the reason is that in our brain, we actually have this finite resource for decision-making capability. And that reduces as we go through our day. And then it refreshes with a good night's sleep and good nutrition. Good rest, maybe, would be better. And good nutrition. And so then we wake up in the morning and hey, we can make decisions again. And just as I say that, kind of tracking yourself like through the day and seeing, gosh, how many decisions you have to make, from which foot goes on the floor first thing in the morning, how you put your dressing gown on, or whether you switch the light on in the bathroom before you go and have a wee, or just go in the sort of semi-dark. Like all of those things, they're all decision-making choices. And obviously most of them are unconscious, but we're still using that decision-making capability. And so we then, have our busy day, caring for others, caring for the work that we do, whatever it might be, making decisions after decision after decision. And then we get home, and if say we're fortunate enough to have someone else preparing food for us, and they say, what would you like to eat tonight? And we go, I cannot make a decision about that. I have no idea what I want to eat. And it's because we've literally run out of that capability. And so that is also really important, that we recognize our capacity for decision making. So if we're at this sort of tipping point about making a stop go decision, making sure that we do it at a time in the day when we are resourced can also be really helpful, because we're far more likely to employ all of our cognitive function to do that than if we, just do it on a, oh God, just do it whim at the end of the day. We might not be thinking or decision making as clearly as we could at another time of the day. So, oh gosh, this is a really big topic. I hadn't realised it was going to expand into this. I really think this is such important stuff, actually. And so just a kind of like few more thoughts, really. One practice, one exercise that can be really super useful is to understand the relative impact of this decision making, this choice, this threshold, or this sliding door choice. And there are 3 key questions that we can do, or that we can ask ourselves, and they could be really good, like speed journaling prompts. So first of all, it's asking ourselves, in the grand scheme of things, what's the impact of this not working as I wish? Like really face into the fear that might be holding you back. Secondly, in the grand scheme of things, this not being exactly as I envision means ... And then thirdly, the last one is, in the grand scheme of things, when this goes exactly as I wish it to ... And so we can sit with the fear, sit with the recognition of uncertainty, and also sit with the pleasure of envisioning things going just right. And that can be really, really helpful. So that's actually an exercise I'm going to take myself through after recording this. I think also, when I was doing a little bit of research around this, I think one of the most useful bits of guidance that I saw, which was just, I think 5 words, was somebody who said, decide you make good decisions. I really loved that. Because if we're holding a belief that we don't make good decisions, it's very hard to overcome that and make any decision. Now, we might have someone else's voice, like a kind of, a powerful presence in our head of someone who once told us that we're no good at making decisions. And so maybe there's some really useful, important work to do there to untangle us from that voice and to really understand, well, what is the value I can take from having heard that, and also how might it benefit me to release that voice now. If that's something that resonates with you, then, and you'd like to do some deeper work on it, then please do reach out and come and work with me one to one. It's so interesting when we start to recognize and understand the different influences and influencers we have had on our lives, and how they might be informing how we're behaving and showing up in the world right now. But the crux of this, the simplicity of these 5 words of decide you make good decisions, can also come from like looking back and seeing similar decisions or changes that you've made in the past and really see like how that's worked out. Like, what have you learned about the decisions that you've made? What would you have loved to do differently? And how might that inform the choices that you make next? But also seeing, oh yeah, I'm good at making decisions. I've made good decisions in the past. I have evidence here. I have data that proves it. And and I think with that clarity, we can also see that decisions are rarely absolutely binary, even if they seem like they were at the time. There are, or there were often more choices available. Now, the challenge here is that the choices might not be or might not have been palatable. So, for example, when we moved here from right across the other side of the country, very different landscape, from somewhere that we lived for 20 years. My family are all from around there. My, very established friendship group, social setting was really wonderful. Our son had grown up there, lots of reasons not to move. And we made this enormous choice, this enormous decision, entirely born out of our own energy, our own fire in our belly, to move right across the country. And one of the things that really enabled me to make that choice was remembering that we could potentially move again. If we didn't get it right, we weren't stuck here for the rest of our lives. We could potentially move again. Now, that moving again is unpalatable, it's expensive, it's really complicated. If we sold here and tried to move back into Cambridgeshire, we could never afford what we had, when we lived there. So lots of reasons why I wouldn't want to do that. And that choice is still available. So recognizing that there are always choices, even if they're unpalatable, can be really useful. And there's a lovely quote from the psychoanalyst Eric Fromm, or Fromm, I think might be. Someone correct me if I've got that wrong. And he once said, creativity requires the courage to let go of certainties. And I really love that, because although in the act of making a decision to make a change, it feels like, oh, that's about being certain. But actually, there is a degree of creativity in here, which requires the courage to let go of certainties, to allow ourselves to say, what if? What if this works? What if this is absolutely the right step for me to take? Rather than getting lost in the fears and the shutting down of what if this isn't the right thing. And I think that quote, creativity requires the courage to let go of certainties. Fear is often grounded in a belief that there are certainties, and hope is often grounded in a belief that there is possibility. And so that can be really, really beautiful to hold. And then, this sort of ties into this, remembering that there are choices even after we've leapt off into the change, even after we've made that decision. It can be a way of remembering and reassuring ourselves of our own endless capacity for change and our ability to care for ourselves and to respond to challenges that we face creatively and compassionately. So we hold ourselves and we hold the decisions that we're making and the decisions that we have made with compassion. And for me, perhaps unsurprisingly, that can be an absolutely vital part of this change-making process. So how does all of that affect things that you're exploring right now? Choices that you've made, how you reflect on those choices that you're facing into, how you sit with and hold space for yourself as you navigate those. And how does that affect my, my tipping point decision? Feels big for me, not so great for, not so sort of great in kind of stature for other people. But for me, I'm going to sit with this decision making process for a little while. For practical, technical reasons, I've got a time frame that I need to work to. I know there are choices around that too, but if I don't work within the time frame, then it means a lot of additional work. So I'm making a choice about, do I want to do that, or do I want to, take the slightly easier path? And I'll let you know where I get to next week, because if I make this choice, the new website might be live by the time the next episode of the podcast comes out, or it might not. And that is fundamentally like where we get to. Like, I'm still in the decision making. And there's actually another I think I got another podcast, either that or I thought about it, which is about, the fact that we often accuse ourselves or accuse others or get accused by others of being indecisive. But my interpretation of indecision is there is a pause in that word that makes it two words, which is I am in decision. I'm in the process of making that decision, and that is okay. And lastly, I just want to share a quote from Nelson Mandela. And he said, "May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears." So, my darlings, I'd love to hear your reflections about this episode. I'd love to hear what thoughts it sparked or what resonance it has had for you. Please do just email me, henny@hennyflynn.co.uk. And there are some really lovely things unfolding for this year. The ways in which we can gather and sort of come into circle together. And so, if you're curious about those and you'd love to connect, please join the mailing list. It's going to be the place to hear about what happens and what's unfolding. It's quite scary for me. There's a number of big decisions, big sliding door moments, tipping points that I'm facing into. But it feels really beautiful. And so I'm trusting that. And it would be so gorgeous to have you along for the journey and walking beside me, or me walking beside you, us walking beside each other, to support each other as we step into the year of the fire horse. Okay, darlings, take care, and I will see you next week, and I send you a hug and a wave.